Journalists Roundtable is a half-hour discussion with Pennsylvania journalists about the week's top political news and current events. Journalists Roundtable is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to this week's edition of Journalists Roundtable. I'm Francine Schertzer. Our guests this week are Whitney Downard, reporter for the Pennsylvania Capital Star, Gillian McGoldrick, Harrisburg Reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Marc Levy, reporter with the Associated Press. Marc, we'll start with you. It's been a few weeks since Pennsylvania's primary election. What did you learn from the results?
So perhaps the most important thing is we know who Democrats will go into the fall with for their congressional slate. There's a huge battle for control of the U.S. House this year. Democrats are hopeful that they'll retake control. Republicans still have a slim majority, but there's at least 4 contested seats in Pennsylvania. Democrats hope to take all 4 of those that are held by Republicans, and they had some contested primaries in those seats, and now we know who their nominees are. We know what their slate looks like and how they'll handle that in the fall and how Republicans will counter those attacks to try to protect those seats. And the other interesting point about that is that the governor had a stake in the outcomes of those primaries, having endorsed, and I think it was 3 contested primaries. In every case, the person he endorsed won. And so that looks good for him, especially when he's got his own battle for re-election and a lot of talk about him potentially seeking the presidency in 2028.
Whitney, what did you take from the election this year?
Yeah, I think that, as Marc indicated, it really seemed to show that Shapiro's endorsement really did hold a lot of weight and was able to push a lot of all of his preferred candidates across the finish line to nab that nomination. But I think that we're still kind of looking at some really tight races and some really competitive ones, especially in the Lehigh Valley and the Scranton area, and even here where I am in Harrisburg. So I think it's still going to be a very long road ahead of us going into November. But for now, it seems like all of those Shapiro-picked candidates were successful.
Gillian, what did you learn from the election?
Yeah, as everyone said, those congressional seats were a big deal, and really set the stage for the November election. But in Philadelphia, there was a contested primary for who was going to fill a vacancy that will be created by U.S. Representative Dwight Evans from his upcoming retirement. And so State Representative Chris Rabb won that election. He's a progressive. He was not backed by the party's establishment at all. And I think that it took some of the Democratic Party, like the machine, as the Working Families Party likes to call it, that the Working Families Party specifically said the machine is dead. So they really celebrated this. Progressives across the state celebrated the win. I would add too that in the 7th congressional, where Bob Brooks is running, he had instead of just like the progressive versus the more establishment candidates, Bob Brooks had created a more like a coalition of both the Working Families Party, Bernie Sanders, and Governor Shapiro, all endorsing him. So it was an interesting election night for sure.
Gillian, since you invoked the title, the Working Families Party, for those who aren't familiar, can you explain who they are and what they stand for? Yeah,
they are a political party that says that they back and are made up of working people, and they are a like labor-backed political party that often now endorses and backs Democratic candidates, progressive Democratic candidates.
All three of you have written a little bit about the 3rd Congressional District, which was the one where Chris Rabb won the Democratic nomination for the seat being vacated by Dwight Evans. Whitney, what do you think about this progressive shift? Do you think this is indicative just of that particular region in Philadelphia, or do you see this being having a greater impact, more of a progressive shift throughout the state?
I think that at least with this, it's a little more Philadelphia focused. The more progressive candidate in the 10th here in Harrisburg, Justin Douglas, did not succeed in trying to topple the party-backed Janelle Stelton. She is the one who got Governor Shapiro's nod. So I don't particularly see it as being a statewide outcome. It seems to have been a little bit more specific to Philadelphia.
Marc, you'd written that at one point Representative Rabb actually considered pulling out of the race. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at one point he had reported that his campaign treasurer was stealing money. I'm not aware that any charges have been filed yet, but I think the way he described it was really just a gut punch to him. He felt betrayed. He felt betrayed for, on behalf of his donors and all the people who'd put their trust in him. And it came at a time when fundraising was a really stiff competition in that race. It was a 4-way race, but with 3 general front runners. And I think, the heat of that competition to raise money was really weighing on him. He stayed in, and, I think in what Whitney was just talking about with this may be more of a Philadelphia phenomenon, the progressive victory there. He was successful in getting a whole constellation of progressive groups to back him and to come in after he had to report his campaign treasurer. And they really stepped up. They spent a lot of money on his behalf to help him get across the finish line. And it showed that, he came away with 44%, 45% of the vote the last time I checked, in a 3-way race. So arguably it was a strong showing for him. Only 1/3 of registered Democrats in that district voted. So you can argue it's a small sample size, but by all accounts, he ran a good race. He was very successful in consolidating progressive support behind him. And so you have to hand it to him for running a good race, and I think it also, to some extent, demonstrates the progressive successes in Philadelphia. In fact, his victory is nationally speaking, one of the biggest victories for progressives nationwide this year so far.
Gillian, do you think that 2 of the other candidates in this race, Ayla Stanford and Sharif Street, kind of canceled each other out because they were seen as more establishment or more moderate candidates?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily think that they canceled one another out. I do think that Dr. Ayla Stanford had been the front runner there for a bit. She had a lot of money backing her from this outside group, 314 Action, that backs different physicians running for office, though it is also a dark money group. And so there were a number of missteps and issues that came up within the last few weeks of the campaign, where you can almost see the voters between the mail ballots and the day of voting. You can see them shift from Dr. Stanford to Senator Street. And Senator Street, though, I should add, was the establishment candidate, though Ayla Stanford was backed by Dwight Evans. But Street had the support of Mayor Sherrell Parker. He had the support of the building trades. He had the support of the Philly Democratic Party. So he had all of the machine and establishment backing him, but he still did not. Like Marc noted, he still came in second to Representative Rabb. And yeah, I wouldn't say they cancel each other out, though. It just was a shift as the election progressed.
As we look toward go ahead, please, Whitney.
I just wanted to add that it really seemed like the race kind of came down to in terms of who got endorsements from who. There was a lot of scrabbling to promote, hey, I got this guy, I got this person. Representative Rabb rallied with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from Congress, and that was a really big gift for him to kind of show off his progressive muscle, so to speak. And so there was a lot of that, especially I feel like in the last days of trying to say, Senator Street's like, I've got the the local support of elected officials, whereas they were all trying to show off what coalitions they were able to build.
As we look toward the general election coming toward us now, how important is Pennsylvania in determining who ultimately will control Congress?
It's a big deal. It may be the biggest deal in the nation right now for Democrats, considering how they have lost the redistricting battle nationally to Republicans. There's been at least a half dozen states, Republican states, that are changing their maps or have changed their maps to increase the potential, the likelihood that Republicans will win more seats in the fall in November's election. So Democrats are lagging there, and that makes Pennsylvania even more important with its 4 contested seats that Democrats could potentially pick up. Now, they could lose all 4 because none of these seats are going to be easy to win. You have 2 members of Congress, Brian Fitzpatrick and Scott Perry, who have beaten back Democratic challenges in election after election that they've been in office. And you have 2 freshmen in very, very closely, narrowly divided districts, Rob Bresnahan and Ryan McKenzie. So it's hard to see any of those districts as a cakewalk for Democrats in the fall. It's going to be a tough battle.
Mark, you had written a bit about other states such as Louisiana passing maps that are more favorable to Republicans. Do you foresee any scenario where Pennsylvania would follow suit and try to do redistricting before the 2030 census?
So technically it's possible. Democrats would have to win the legislature. Governor Shapiro would have to win re-election, and then they would have to decide that they have the political will to essentially pass a new map through the legislature, redraw it, pass it, and have the governor sign it in time for 2028. And that is another point, is that while Republican states, a number of them are redistricting for this year to try to help Republicans maintain control, there is a next wave of states that will redistrict in 2028 that are planning that, including Republican states, to increase the number of Republican victories in 2028 to keep that momentum going. And so there will be pressure on Democratic states, if they haven't done it in 2026, to try to redistrict for 2028. And so that if Pennsylvania has a unified Democratic government after this election, there could be pressure on Pennsylvania to join that wave.
To what extent do you think federal or public sentiment over federal issues, things like the war in Iran, the economy, are going to impact how people vote in November?
Affordability is really a big one. You're hearing that from everybody. They're all wondering, our gas price is going to come down anytime soon. My utility bills keep going up. I'm not getting any relief. So I think that affordability is going to be huge. I also hear a lot about healthcare prices and just feeling that the costs are going up and there's not a lot of options for people who make slightly too much for Medicaid but don't have a good private option. And so I do think that these are things that are weighing very heavily on voters' minds and on voters' pocketbooks. And it's going to depend on whether the candidate can convince them that they're going to do a better job, regardless of party, for their constituents.
Gillian, you've been covering the governor's race. How would you describe the tone and the messaging of both the campaigns and the early campaign ads that each of them have been putting out?
Yeah, Governor Shapiro today, Thursday, June 4th, put out his first ad buy on TV, and he led with a bunch of young kids interviewing him, talking about free breakfast as his opening pitch to voters. Treasurer Stacey Garrity, the Republican candidate challenging him in November. She has not yet been up on TV, but she has been doing some digital ads, calling into question Governor Shapiro's past his earlier stances on things, whether it's school choice or his an issue back in 2023 where a top aide had been accused of sexual harassment and remained on staff. So there are a couple of things brewing. I think that we're just getting into the thick of it now, though, post primary, where they're starting to try and set themselves apart.
I want to talk about fundraising briefly. As of May 4th, Josh Shapiro's campaign had $37.8 million in cash on hand. Stacey Garrity's had $1.4 million. Is it possible for an underfunded candidate to still remain competitive in a race like this?
It's going to be difficult. Yeah, it's not a very easy road. Governor Shapiro just has a really large amount of money to rely on and pull from when he wants to make these appeals. And I see them both trying to travel a lot though and actually meet face to face with voters, but it's very hard to distinguish yourself in this race without a lot of money behind you.
I want to take a look at just one or two of the state legislative races as well. Gillian, you also wrote about Representative Greg Vitale. He lost a seat in the May primary. He has been a state rep since 1993. What led to his loss?
Yeah, he had, and he lost by a significant amount too. He had previously been challenged by the local Democratic establishment, arguing that they needed new blood in the seat. They had been unsuccessful previously in 2022. So talking to Representative Vitale ahead of time, he really felt confident that his long career as the largely the minority chair and then now the majority chair of the Environmental Protection Committee had sort of protected him. He has focused on climate change for decades, but that is something that that Democrats have largely stopped talking about as a top issue. So I think that really played into this. But he lost to a local township commissioner who will take over the seat in November.
Do any of you see a scenario where either the state House or the state Senate shifts in control after the general election?
I mean, anything is possible. The state House has a one-seat Democratic majority. The state Senate has I guess it's a four-seat Senate majority, but that means Democrats only need to pick up 2 seats to tie it. Is that right? So, I mean, anything is possible. Democrats have not had control of the legislature in more than 30 years. For much of that time, Republicans have had control of the legislature. Not now, though. It is divided. But, yeah, it is. Anything could happen in November. Democrats are optimistic about their chances of picking off at least 2 Republican seats in the fall.
The Skills Game lobby spent over $8 million to back the opponents of 3 Republican senators in what were considered Republican-safe districts. Do you see other issues beyond the Skills Game issue that might be indicative of what happens in the legislature in the coming year?
I wouldn't say there are other top issues that will decide control. I think it really will come down to those national and international issues when people go to the ballot box. Midterm elections are often the rebuke of whoever the party in power is. And obviously right now Republicans control the presidency, they control the US House, they control the US Senate. So I think that it will largely be that drives people to the polls. And that's part of Governor Shapiro's sort of confidence heading into November is he wants to flip those 4 seats. And then also he has asked Democrats directly, the Democratic Party's convention earlier this year, bring me a trifecta. Like he wants the state Senate to flip as well.
I want to kind of shift gears a little bit because now that we're in the month of June, the state budget is technically due on June 30th. Does anybody have any insights as to what's happening with the budget process or where we are at this point in the game?
Yeah, I spoke with House Majority Leader Matt Bradford this week and Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman this week. They both said that they are further along than they were last year. Obviously, last year was a pretty tough year. The budget was almost 5 months late. They really disagreed on a lot of stuff, largely the main issue of public transit. But that is not an issue that will come up this year. Governor Shapiro flexed some state funds to hold over some of those public transit issues that were happening in Philadelphia. So those issues won't come up until next year. So they at least claim they're further along, but we'll see.
Whitney, you cover the state legislature quite a bit. What other policy issues and what kind of bills have been moving through the legislature now that they are back in session for this month?
Yeah, so the big one that has actually been moving through both chambers is a ban on cell phone use for children in school. They really want to have a bell-to-bell ban, meaning that as soon as the first bell goes off, students are not allowed to have their cell phones until the end of the day. And it has had some bipartisan concerns, but has largely been supported by the General Assembly. Governor Josh Shapiro has called on them to send the bill to his desk in his February address. So that's something that actually has been moving pretty quickly, and the House just sent a revised version over to the Senate, so that's back in the Senate's hands. That's probably the only thing that's actually been moving in both chambers, but other priorities are still in the works. People are trying to kind of nibble at the edges of smaller issues, but I don't think that there's a broad consensus for many other problems or priorities.
Marc, you've been writing quite a bit about data centers. In particular, Representative Jamie Walsh and Senator Jarrett Coleman are both proposing to remove incentives to data center establishment and also put a moratorium on the development. And then you write about something similar happening in Ohio. Are there lessons from Ohio that we can maybe take here in Pennsylvania as this is beginning to develop?
Well, the one thing that Jamie Walsh probably knows all about is that there is a very, very strong community backlash to data centers, not only in Pennsylvania, but in Ohio. It's sweeping across Ohio and in at least a dozen other states where data center development is brisk. And so Pennsylvania is one of those states where it's a big target for data center development. It has a very friendly gubernatorial administration with Josh Shapiro in charge. And what we know, though, is that states that have tried to remove their incentives or slap a moratorium on have not been successful. So of all the moratorium bills across the United States, none have moved except for one in Maine that got to the governor's desk and she vetoed it. Janet Mills vetoed it, talking about wanting to have had a caveat or an exception in there for a particular establishment. What you can learn is that with who we have as governor, with support for data centers from labor unions, which divides Democrats, as well as broadly speaking the business sector, a moratorium bill faces a very, very steep road, as does any bill that's going to remove incentives such as the sales tax break, which about 38 states have some version of that, and is very important to attracting the hyperscale data centers. It's a huge financial benefit to them. It's what attracts them to states that have it, and that has helped make Pennsylvania attractive to them. And so, similar to moratoriums, states where legislation in other states have sought to remove that some sort of financial incentive, those have largely failed too.
One concern that's potentially tied to data centers is once they're present, what impact they have on electricity rates. Mm-hmm. Electricity rates for Pennsylvanians went up earlier this week for I believe June 1st was the date. And you had written about how some entities, some other states are considering looking at the profitability of the utility companies. What are state legislators doing here as we consider spiking electricity rates in Pennsylvania?
I mean, state lawmakers in Pennsylvania are they're looking at a lot of the same things that other states are looking at, where electricity prices are going up. The bottom line is that the horse is already out of the barn. The reason why electricity prices here have been going up for at least the past year is because of data center demand on electricity. There's not enough power plants to feed that demand. And so the way the regional grid works is it sends that signal, that price signal, to power plant owners that we're going to pay you more so you build more power plants. But it's so much easier to build a data center than it is to build a power plant. The other aspect of Pennsylvanians' bills, which you touched on, is transmission costs, distribution costs, building substations that local utilities make a profit on. And so the governor here, Josh Shapiro, has pushed back on utility increases that focus on that aspect. And so there's a lot of talk in the utility sector now about affordability. You can't keep charging people more if they can't pay it. And as we talked about earlier, one of the big issues in the fall election when we talk about affordability is not just gas, not just groceries, not just healthcare, but it's also your electricity bill.
Whitney, before we run out of time, I want to get to talk a little bit about your article today. You had written that the House is considering enabling chip-enabled cards for SNAP recipients. Can you explain why this has been considered?
Yeah, so your credit card or debit cards likely have a chip-enabled scan, that tap that you can use at the cash register, but EBT cards, which are used for SNAP recipients, do not have that. It's been a little difficult to roll out, but other states have started to roll that out. And the chip is a lot more secure because you can avoid getting that number and PIN skimmed, it's called. There are skimmers that are really easy to attach to the terminals that you have at the grocery store or at a convenience store when you're buying something. And so the chips are hopefully a way to stop those numbers and those benefits from being stolen from Pennsylvanians who are using SNAP. When California instituted theirs, they reported an 83% reduction in stolen benefits. So this is something the state is really eager to do, was just kind of waiting for the technology to catch up, and it seems like it's here. So there was a bipartisan bill yesterday that passed through the Human Services Committee that would make the state adopt that quicker, earlier rather than sooner, especially because federal funding incentives change after October 1st.
Before we run out of time, Whitney, what are you working on this week?
Yeah, so in the week coming up, I am actually going to be working a lot on healthcare legislation, and we're kind of looking at things around staffing shortages, especially in rural areas. That's the project I'm going to be working on.
Marc, what will you be working on?
Looking at what states are doing on AI regulation, Pennsylvania is among them, and with the backdrop of President Trump saying that he will go after states that try to regulate AI.
Gillian, how about you?
Yeah, I'm working on a budget update that's published later this week that I think you might have read the entire thing. They think they're a little bit further along.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Our guests this week have been Whitney Downard, reporter for the Pennsylvania Capital Star, Gillian McGoldrick, Harrisburg Reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Marc Levy, reporter with the Associated Press. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you for watching Journalists Roundtable. I'm Francine Schertzer.
Full episodes of politics and policy content like the program you just listened to are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Discover other shows like The Capitol Preview, On the Issues, candidate interviews, and more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.